Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking today on Genesis 21, 8, about Hagar and Ishmael being sent away, and Matthew 10, 24 to 39, about when Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. This week, there's been numerous news articles about difficult and challenging situations. The mini sub going down to the Titanic captured our hearts. We were afraid of what may happen to the men on board, who now we know sadly have died. The country has also been celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Empire Windrush arriving at Tilbury in Essex on the 22nd of June 1948. The ship brought members of our Commonwealth from the Caribbean to fill post-war labour shortages in the UK. And the Windrush generation, people who arrived between then and 1971, we understand we're often afraid. There's been many stories told and shared over this week as they adapted to a sort of predominantly white British culture. It's also been Refugee Week. It's been a busy week. The week in the year when the diverse culture and creativity of refugees worldwide is celebrated. Behind each individual refugee's circumstances, there have been times when they felt very afraid for a wide variety of reasons. And then more locally this week, we've had a parish council meeting in the Southminster parish about more new housing developments. Residents have objected to building more houses around the parish boundary because of the impact this would have on the area. Roads are unsuitable, schools oversubscribed. There'll be increased wait times at doctors for appointments, the loss of farmland, the effect on our natural habitats. Those who live in the Dengie are afraid of more changes, more housing, and what this would bring. So quite a number of situations when people have been or are currently afraid. And God tells us repeatedly in our reading from Matthew today, do not be afraid. 3 times. According to Tom Wright, who's a biblical scholar, do not be afraid is the most repeated command in the Bible. In our Old Testament reading today, we heard about Hagar being sent into the desert by Abraham with their, so we know now, teenage son, Ishmael. And an angel said to her, do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying. The command to not be afraid is repeated, as I said in this gospel reading, as Jesus sends the 12 disciples out to minister to the people. But there was a lot for the disciples to be afraid about. Arrests, violence, abuse, emotional abuse, yet Jesus kept telling the disciples, do not be afraid. Jesus had experienced these things and knew that those who followed him would face the same treatment. So he kept reminding them that they weren't to be afraid. Jesus didn't say, don't be afraid because God will look after you. He's honest about the reality of the situation and explains to the disciples that truth and justice will win in the end. But there will be troubles. He warns them about those things that will lure and tempt them, that these are things that we ought to fear. But he assures them that God is stronger than the strongest opponent they will ever meet. God knows what we do not. The use of every hair on our heads is numbered confirms and assures us that God knows every detail of our lives, every aspect of who we are and what is going on for us. God's wisdom and knowledge is far beyond our human understanding. Matthew 34 goes on to say, "Don't think that I came to bring peace. I came to bring a sword." Peace and a sword, do these things go together? And Jesus tells the disciples that faith in him does bring trouble, causes division and not unity, conflict. Families will be divided. Those who believe clashing with those who don't believe. Swords illustrate the future that the disciples are going to come against, that the believing are subject to the same tests that Jesus has endured. As our old self, as Christian believers, is crucified on the cross. And we carry a sword that challenges society, but offers people also a peace that they don't often understand. Professing to being a believing Christian is courageous and bold. It's a bold thing to do, especially in our postmodern society. It can be very hard to tell people you don't share our faith, to stand out in the crowd, and then to stay loyal to Christ, to not deny him, as we know Peter did, or turn against him as Judas, like Judas. Being afraid can muddle our minds, can paralyze our thoughts, and prevent us being who we authentically are. So to not be afraid is a way of staying true to ourselves, true to Christ, true to our calling, true to the peace and love that we offer. Sam Wells, vicar of St. Martin's in the Fields in central London, talks about how, as a young Christian, he was given a cross to carry in his pocket to encourage him and remind him that Christ is with him wherever he goes, day and night. But over the years, he's come to realize that he is the cross. He is the one that has also been crucified with Christ. And that Christ is the one who keeps him in his pocket. Because God knows when we have turned to him, he keeps us close. He keeps us near him, particularly when we may be fearful or afraid. God will be attentive to our needs. God will see and hear us. God will open our eyes like he did to Hagar as he showed her the way and the well that would give her and Ishmael water to drink. God will do the same for us. And as we listen to God, we'll hear his voice saying, "Do not be afraid." When we, like generations before us and those who are troubled today, are no longer afraid, we will discover that God is in our midst, because fear stops us from seeing and hearing God. Listen out for the whisper of God saying, do not be afraid. For God's guiding and his Spirit is with us. Do not be afraid to talk about your faith, to call yourself a Christian. Jesus is teaching us that it may be risky and it may change our lives, our friendships, those who are loyal to us, and it's going to challenge our faithfulness to God. But don't be afraid to always carry the cross in your pocket, the sword of truth, the sword that leads to eternal peace. Remember that God is always carrying you in his. Amen.